My name is Kate Sullivan, and I want to tell you about the day I discovered that sometimes the most worthless-looking inheritance can turn out to be the most valuable gift of all. That afternoon, following my grandmother's funeral, we gathered in the conference room at the law office of Peterson and Associates, waiting for the reading of the will. The air was thick with anticipation and barely concealed greed. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, while my brother Marcus Sullivan sat across from me. My father David and mother Carol positioned themselves on either side of him, like two guardian angels protecting their precious son's interests. The symbolism was not lost on me, even in my grief. "Can we please get started?" Marcus asked, glancing at the brand-new Rolex day date adorning his wrist. "I have an important business meeting to attend later this afternoon." Even at a time when our grandmother had been in the ground for less than 3 hours, he could not resist displaying his self-importance and busy schedule. Everything about Marcus was calculated to impress, from his expensive Italian suit to his perfectly styled hair. Mr. Peterson, a distinguished gentleman with silver hair and thick-rimmed glasses, surveyed the room with sharp, penetrating eyes. "Of course, Mr. Sullivan," he replied, his voice carrying the gravelly authority of someone who had been handling estate matters for over 4 decades. "Now that everyone has arrived, we shall proceed with the reading of Mrs. Rose Mackenzie's last will and testament." The room fell into immediate silence, broken only by the soft ticking of an antique grandfather clock in the corner and the distant sound of traffic from the busy street below. "According to Mrs. Rose Mackenzie's will," Peterson began, clearing his throat and lifting the first document from a neat stack before him, "we shall begin with the distribution of liquid assets and cash holdings." I noticed my mother Carol's hand tighten around my father's arm with such force that her knuckles turned white. She had been calculating and anticipating this moment for years, ever since Grandmother Rose had been moved to the nursing home. "Marcus Sullivan," Peterson announced, and Marcus immediately straightened his posture like a soldier called to attention, "will receive a cash payment in the amount of $5 million, along with a 15% ownership stake in Mackenzie Construction Company." "Yes!" Marcus could not contain himself, letting out a triumphant whisper while pounding his fist on the polished table surface. The wild joy in his eyes was almost frightening in its intensity, like the satisfaction of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. Mother Carol beamed with pride as she patted Marcus on the shoulder, her eyes glowing with maternal satisfaction. I always knew that Rose would recognize Marcus's business acumen and potential. She was such a wise woman. Father David released a long sigh of relief, his face breaking into the first genuine smile I had seen from him in months. "This represents the perfect investment in our family's future. Mother may have been getting on in years, but she certainly knew how to make the right decisions when it truly mattered." The atmosphere in the room immediately lightened, at least for the 3 of them. The distant relatives who had gathered for the occasion, Uncle Tom and Cousin Sarah, began whispering among themselves with voices full of envy and barely concealed resentment. "What an incredible amount of money," Sarah muttered to her husband with obvious bitterness. $5 million in cash plus company shares. Some people have all the luck." Peterson waited patiently for the murmuring to subside before continuing with his official duties. "Next, we come to the provisions made for Miss Kate Sullivan." Every eye in the room turned toward me with laser focus. However, these were not looks of anticipation or excitement. Instead, I saw a mixture of mockery, pity, and the cruel anticipation of people waiting to witness someone else's humiliation. "Kate Sullivan will receive..." Peterson paused for a moment, seemingly searching for the right words, or perhaps simply catching his breath before delivering what everyone expected to be disappointing news. My heart jumped into my throat. I genuinely was not expecting any substantial inheritance. All I had hoped for was perhaps a small keepsake, maybe one of her photo albums, or perhaps the old pipe she used to smoke on quiet evenings when she thought no one was watching. The property located at 1247 Maple Street, along with this key. As Peterson finished speaking, he reached into a brown paper envelope and produced a single key, which he placed on the table before me. This was not a shiny modern electronic key, nor even an ordinary brass house key. This was a heavy, rust-covered, ancient iron key that bore the unmistakable marks of age and weather. It slid across the smooth mahogany table surface with a harsh scraping sound before coming to rest beside my trembling hand. The room fell into a brief, stunned silence, followed immediately by an eruption of snickering and barely suppressed laughter. The address Peterson had mentioned, 1247 Maple Street, was unfortunately familiar to me. That was the location of the small house that Grandmother Rose had purchased in the 1950s when she first immigrated to America. It had been sitting empty for the past 5 years, ever since she had been forced to move into the nursing home after a serious fall. The entire neighborhood had deteriorated significantly over the decades, becoming known for crime, vandalism, and neglect. "Well, there you have it, Kate," my father David said with a cold laugh that cut through me like a blade. "Even Mother knew that broken-down junk was all you deserved. That house is practically falling down, and the demolition costs alone would probably exceed its value." Mother Carol nodded in agreement, her voice dripping with false sympathy and genuine cruelty. "That old place has a leaking roof and a cracked foundation. Do not expect any help from us with repairs or maintenance. Kate, at least you will have somewhere to live now instead of that tiny 20-square-meter apartment you have been renting. You should be grateful that your grandmother remembered you at all." Marcus was currently examining his $5 million check with obvious satisfaction. He did not even bother to look directly at me, instead glancing at the rusty key from the corner of his eye with obvious disdain. "Kate, when the repair costs for that dump exceed your ability to pay, which I am certain they will, I might consider buying it from you for a token amount. I could level the lot and turn it into a parking space. Consider it a brotherly favor." "No, thank you," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow perfectly clear in the silence of the room. I reached out and grasped the cold metal key in my palm. The rough texture bit into my skin, but I felt an unexpected sense of comfort and connection. This was something that Grandmother Rose had chosen specifically for me. Even if it was nothing more than a ruin, it was a place where she had lived and created memories. "Poor Kate," Cousin Sarah whispered, though her voice carried clearly through the quiet room. "She really did not receive anything of actual value, did she?" Uncle Tom shook his head with exaggerated pity. "That old house cannot even be sold in its current condition. The location is too remote, and the neighborhood has become quite dangerous." Just as Marcus was rising to his feet, preparing to deliver what I am sure would have been a self-congratulatory victory speech, I noticed that Mr. Peterson was making a subtle gesture with his hand. Beside him on the table sat a thick, sealed manila envelope that had not yet been addressed. Peterson adjusted his glasses and looked past the smugly satisfied Marcus to focus his attention directly on me. There was something strange in his expression, something that was not pity or sympathy, but rather a kind of suppressed excitement. "Kate," Peterson said, his voice becoming noticeably gentler, "this envelope contains materials that your grandmother specifically requested be given to you privately." He slid the envelope across the table until it rested in front of me. Written across the front in Grandmother Rose's familiar, elegant handwriting were the words, "For Kate, open when you're alone." My father David frowned with obvious irritation and waved his hand dismissively. Peterson, there is no need for all this mysterious drama. It is probably just some old photographs or love letters that she did not want the rest of the family to see. Do not encourage Kate to develop unrealistic expectations. The will has been quite clear about the distribution of assets. This is a supplementary document that forms part of the complete will, Mr. Sullivan. Peterson replied coolly, then turned his attention back to me with a meaningful look. Please take very good care of this, Kate. It is extremely important. I nodded silently and clutched the envelope against my chest as though it were the most precious treasure in the world. Marcus shrugged his shoulders and adjusted his silk tie with obvious satisfaction. Well, I suppose this little charade has reached its conclusion. I believe this demonstrates quite clearly how our grandmother valued each of our respective contributions to the family. I intend to use this inheritance to expand Mackenzie Company's operations and restore it to its former glory. As for Kate, he smiled with undisguised contempt. I wish you the very best of luck living in that rat hole. They filed out of the conference room like a parade of victorious peacocks, strutting with arrogance and self-satisfaction. Not one of them looked back at me or showed any concern about how I would manage to travel to my supposed new home. Only I remained, sitting alone in the empty conference room, holding a rusty key and an unopened envelope. I bent my head and examined the key more closely in the dim light filtering through the office windows. Due to the extensive rust and corrosion, any markings on the key were difficult to make out. I rubbed the surface with my thumb and could just barely discern some tiny numbers etched into the metal. 1038. 1038? That was Grandmother Rose's birthday, October 8th. Was this some kind of code, or simply a sentimental engraving? Whatever it meant, I knew that from this moment forward, I had been cast out by my family, but what I did not yet understand was that this was actually the beginning of my rebirth. 3 days later, on a gray and drizzly Saturday morning, I drove my second-hand Toyota Corolla to 1247 Maple Street to see my inheritance firsthand. The reality of the property was even worse than I had imagined in my most pessimistic moments. The white picket fence that had once surrounded the front yard had rotted to a dark, moldy brown and collapsed into the waist-high weeds that had taken over the landscape. The exterior walls of the house had lost most of their paint, revealing the underlying red brick and weather-stained wooden siding beneath. The front porch steps had partially collapsed, and the porch light hung at a precarious angle, swaying in the wind like a dying animal. This was my grand inheritance. I took a deep breath and carefully made my way up the creaking wooden steps to the front door. The key stuck slightly in the lock, requiring several firm twists before I heard the satisfying click of the mechanism turning. The heavy oak door swung open with a prolonged groan. A wave of stale air rushed out to greet me, carrying the mingled scents of dust, age, and dried lavender. That was Grandmother Rose's signature fragrance, and it brought tears to my eyes immediately. I remembered countless afternoons from my childhood when my parents would be too busy taking Marcus to prestigious social events, golf lessons, and networking dinners to pay attention to me. During those times, I would be sent here to stay with Grandmother Rose. I would sit on the carpet in front of the fireplace while she told me stories of her youth in Ireland, her journey to America by ship, the hardships of the Great Depression, and how she had managed to build a life in this foreign land. All the furniture in the house was covered with white dust sheets, creating an army of silent ghosts throughout the rooms. I pulled back the protective covering from the nearest armchair, sending clouds of dust dancing through the afternoon sunlight. For the next week, I threw myself into cleaning and restoration work with an almost manic energy. I quit my job at the local library, reasoning that my meager salary would never be sufficient to cover the extensive repairs this house would require. I decided to give myself an extended break from normal life and dedicate myself completely to understanding this place that Grandmother Rose had left me. On the fourth day of my cleaning efforts, I made an extraordinary discovery in the study behind the massive mahogany bookshelf. The design was ingeniously clever and completely hidden. Only when specific books were removed from particular positions on the shelves would a secret panel spring open in the backing. I had accidentally triggered the mechanism while clearing away yellowed encyclopedias and outdated reference materials. Inside the hidden compartment was a black metal file box. My heart began racing as I lifted the container with shaking hands. Inside, neatly organized and carefully maintained, was a collection of documents that would change my understanding of everything. The top document was a property deed, which was not particularly surprising since this was obviously the paperwork for the house itself. However, as I continued through the stack, my hands began trembling uncontrollably. There was a second deed, a third, a fourth, and many more. This was not just 1247 Maple Street. These documents represented ownership of 3 entire city blocks surrounding Maple Street, from house number 1200 all the way to 1500, including the abandoned industrial alleys that ran behind the properties. Every single property deed listed the same owner, Rose Mackenzie. I rushed to the window and stared out at what I had always seen as a deteriorating, worthless slum neighborhood. In my eyes, this had been nothing but urban decay and poverty. But according to these legal documents, this represented a massive, contiguous piece of prime real estate. I immediately pulled out my smartphone and began researching property values on Zillow and several professional real estate websites. Although the area appeared run down and neglected, the city's recent East Side expansion project had designated this entire zone as a future core commercial development area. Current market estimates placed land values at $3,200 per square foot. I grabbed a calculator and began frantically computing numbers. 3 city blocks, plus the rear industrial access roads, totaled approximately 8,750 square feet. The number that appeared on my calculator screen made me dizzy enough that I had to grip the windowsill to remain standing. $28 million. This collection of properties that my father had dismissed as a garbage dump and Marcus had mocked as a rat's nest was worth $28 million in land value alone. But I had not yet reached the bottom of that black metal box. At the very bottom, carefully folded, was a handwritten note. The handwriting was definitely Grandmother Rose's, containing just one brief line. "Look deeper, Kate. Check the basement. Remember my birthday." The entrance to the basement was concealed beneath a carpet in the kitchen pantry. Without that note's guidance, I might never have discovered it in my lifetime. The stairs leading underground were narrow and steep, and the air was filled with that distinctive smell of damp earth and old stone. I carefully made my way down with a flashlight, watching each step to avoid stumbling in the darkness. The basement was not particularly large, ending at what appeared to be an ordinary brick wall. However, I noticed that one brick was slightly different in color from the others. When I pressed against it, the brick shifted, revealing an electronic keypad hidden behind it. I took a deep breath and entered the number sequence I had found on the key. 1038. A red light flashed. Access denied. I stared at the keypad in confusion. Had I misunderstood? Were the numbers on the key not referring to her birthday after all? I thought back to the markings I had seen, 10-38. There had been a gap in the middle. Suddenly, I remembered another date that Grandmother Rose had mentioned frequently. 1938. That was the year she was born. October 38. I tried a new combination. Beep. A green light illuminated, followed by the mechanical sound of gears turning. The brick wall slid away like something from a movie, revealing a small chamber approximately 5 square meters in size. The secret room contained only a safe and a simple table. The safe was not locked, merely closed. I pulled open the heavy door, and what I saw inside nearly caused me to drop my flashlight in shock. Inside were dozens of file folders arranged chronologically by year: 1980, 1995, 2005, 2015, and many others. I randomly selected a folder from the 1980s and opened it. The contents made my hands shake so violently I could barely hold the papers steady. These were original stock purchase certificates for Apple Computer, followed by Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and dozens of other companies that had become household names. Each certificate was accompanied by detailed trading records. Grandmother Rose had not been a passive buy-and-hold investor. The documentation revealed that she possessed extraordinary market timing and intuition, consistently reducing her positions before major market crashes and increasing her holdings during downturns. This represented 50 years of nearly perfect investment decisions. I opened the stock trading application on my phone and began calculating the current value of her holdings based on the share quantities listed in the documents. $12 million, and that was not even the complete picture. At the bottom of the safe was an even thicker stack of documents representing additional real estate holdings. 2 commercial office buildings in the downtown business district, 5 luxury residential properties in the suburbs, even a piece of undeveloped industrial land near the harbor. The combined estimated value of these additional properties was at least $8 million. I collapsed onto the cold concrete floor, surrounded by documents worth a fortune beyond my wildest imagination. My mind went completely blank, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in the small chamber. So this was the truth. The woman I had known as Grandmother Rose, who always wore old wool sweaters and argued over a few cents at discount grocery stores, who was dismissed by her children as old-fashioned and out of touch, was actually one of the city's most secretive and successful wealthy individuals. She had been like a whale swimming in the ocean depths, silently accumulating vast wealth, while her family, my parents and my brother, focused their attention on the small fish swimming near the surface. Suddenly, I remembered the sealed envelope that I had not yet opened. For Kate, open when you're alone. I retrieved the envelope from my backpack and carefully tore open the seal. Inside was a long letter and a legal document. The paper was slightly yellowed, and the handwriting showed a slight tremor, indicating that Grandmother Rose had written this shortly before her death. My dearest Kate, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means you have discovered at least part of the truth. You are probably sitting on the floor in the basement right now, staring at these documents in amazement, just like you used to do as a child when you could not find your favorite toy. But now let me tell you the complete truth. I spent 70 years building this financial empire, not for people who only value money, but for someone who truly understands the meaning of worth and character. Marcus sees $5 million in cash, and I know exactly what he will do with it. Expensive cars, parties, and those meaningless business expansion schemes that sound impressive but lack substance. He is an intelligent young man, but he has been spoiled and lacks any real foundation. Money in his hands will slip away like sand. The tighter he grasps it, the faster it will disappear. Your parents, David and Carol, have spent years watching my assets and calculating when I would die so they could inherit. They only see the surface operations of Mackenzie Construction Company and have no idea where the real value of the business lies. I have been observing all of you carefully for the past 3 years. Every time Marcus visits me at the nursing home, he starts checking his watch within 10 minutes and makes not-so-subtle hints about the company needing financial investment. When your parents visit, their eyes constantly wander around my room as though they fear I might have hidden valuable antiques that I plan to give to the nursing staff instead of family. Only you, Kate. You come every Tuesday and Friday without fail. You read to me, help me trim my fingernails, and listen patiently to the same old stories I have told 100 times before. You never ask me what I have or what I might leave you. You only care about what I need. My dear child, true inheritance is not about money. It is about wisdom, character, and the ability to see beyond surface appearances. You have already proven that you possess these qualities. That rusty key was evidence that you had passed the test. Now I want to share with you one final secret. The real value of Mackenzie Construction Company is not in the current building contracts or the aging construction equipment. The company's core worth lies in 12 pieces of undeveloped land reserves that I secretly acquired 30 years ago through shell companies and transferred to corporate ownership. Your father and brother have no idea these properties exist because they have never bothered to examine the dusty old files in the company archives, nor do they understand complex land development maps. These 12 properties are now worth more than $30 million. The legal document in this envelope transfers 51% ownership of Mackenzie Construction Company to you. Yes, you read that correctly. As the controlling shareholder, all of this belongs to you. Go now, my little girl. Show them what the true Mackenzie spirit really means. I will love you always, Rose Mackenzie. P.S. Peterson will officially activate this stock transfer on your 26th birthday, which is next month. Until then, remain silent. Observe them carefully, just as I observed all of you. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. I clutched those precious papers against my chest as though I was embracing Grandmother Rose's warm body one final time. In this game of family wealth and power, everyone had assumed I was the worthless pawn. They had no idea that I was actually the only winner. The following month was the longest and most fascinating period of my entire life. I continued driving my old Toyota and wearing ordinary clothes. I did not contact anyone about my discoveries, not even Peterson's law office, trusting that he was waiting for the appointed time, just as Grandmother Rose had planned. Meanwhile, I began observing my family members through social media and our family group chat applications. Marcus's life was spiraling out of control, exactly as Grandmother Rose had predicted. Within 2 days of receiving his $5 million check, he had ordered a Lamborghini Aventador. His Instagram feed became a continuous stream of wealth displays, featuring expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, and a so-called model girlfriend during extravagant trips to Las Vegas. Even more ironically, in the 3rd week he announced a brilliant business opportunity, investing in a cryptocurrency startup called Crypto Future. He boasted in our family chat about this being a guaranteed path to even greater wealth, even mocking our father David for being too conservative in his financial thinking. Father David and Mother Carol were busy renovating their mansion in the wealthy district, while also scheming about how to exclude me from future family gatherings without appearing openly cruel. During all of this family drama, I had quietly assembled a professional team consisting of accountants, land appraisers, and experienced attorneys. With Peterson's discreet assistance, we completed a comprehensive evaluation and legal verification of all the assets I had inherited. The final numbers settled at a breathtaking total. Maple Street development rights, $28 million. Stock investment portfolio, $12 million. Other commercial and residential properties, $80 million. My initial estimate had been far too low. Mackenzie Construction Company controlling interest, including land reserves, $45 million. Grand total, $93 million. Marcus's inheritance, combined with his rapidly depreciating company shares, amounted to less than 1% of what I now controlled. But I understood that true justice was not simply about possessing wealth. It was about choosing the perfect moment to completely destroy their arrogance and sense of superiority. That moment would be my 26th birthday. My 26th birthday celebration took place at the Sullivan family's vacation estate in the Hamptons. This was not because they wanted to honor me, but because this date coincidentally fell on the evening before Mackenzie Construction Company's annual shareholders meeting, when all family members and company executives would be gathered together. I had not originally been invited to this gathering, but I specifically sent my mother a message saying I wanted to come, thank everyone for their support, and discuss plans for handling the old house. They assumed I was coming to beg for help. They believed I was finally ready to admit defeat and ask Marcus to fulfill his earlier promise to symbolically purchase the property. When I walked into that brilliantly lit ballroom wearing a tasteful but unremarkable black dress, Marcus was standing beside an elaborate champagne fountain, his face flushed red from obvious overindulgence. "Well, well, look who decided to join us," Marcus announced loudly, ensuring that every person in the room would turn to stare at us. "It's our Queen of Ruins, Kate." What happened? Did that dump finally collapse completely? The crowd erupted in cruel laughter. Mother Carol approached with a wine glass in her hand, wearing that familiar expression of false concern. "Kate, since you're here, why don't you find a quiet corner and get something to eat? Please try not to embarrass yourself in front of our guests." Father David gave me a cold, dismissive look. "If you came here to ask for money, don't waste your breath. The company's cash flow has been extremely tight lately." I said nothing, simply walking quietly to the center of the great hall. At that moment, the doors opened again. Mr. Peterson entered, but he was not alone. Behind him walked 4 lawyers in dark business suits, each carrying a briefcase. The atmosphere in the room immediately became tense and uncomfortable. "Peterson?" Father David frowned with confusion. "What are you doing here? Tomorrow's shareholders' meeting is when we need your services." Peterson ignored my father and walked directly to me, offering a slight bow. "Miss Kate, all the documents have been prepared and are ready for execution." This unexpected gesture caused a wave of surprised murmurs throughout the room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Sullivan family and all shareholders present," Peterson turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying clearly throughout the spacious ballroom. "I am here tonight to execute the final provisions of Mrs. Rose Mackenzie's will, provisions that become effective today on Miss Kate Sullivan's 26th birthday." Marcus laughed dismissively. "Oh, please, what could there possibly be left? Some old furniture from that broken-down house?" Peterson fixed him with an icy stare and opened his briefcase, removing a thick stack of legal documents and placing them on the table. According to the irrevocable trust agreement and stock transfer documents signed by Mrs. Rose Mackenzie, effective today, October 24th, 2023, Kate Sullivan officially becomes the controlling shareholder of Mackenzie Construction Company, holding 51% voting rights. "What?" Father David's wineglass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor. "That's impossible!" Mother Carol shrieked. "That's my company. How could my mother give the business to her? She doesn't know anything about construction." Peterson ignored the hysteria and continued reading. Furthermore, according to the asset inventory, Miss Kate Sullivan now holds legal ownership of the following properties: the entire Maple Street district, all securities in Mrs. Rose Mackenzie's investment portfolio, and 12 undeveloped strategic land reserves held under company ownership. He paused, allowing his gaze to sweep across every stunned face in the room. According to independent auditing by a certified public accounting firm, Miss Kate Sullivan's current personal net worth is approximately $93 million. Absolute silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. Even Marcus's girlfriend, who had been giggling stupidly at his side all evening, stood with her mouth hanging open in shock. Marcus's face turned deathly pale as he stumbled toward the table and grabbed the documents with shaking hands. "This is fraud! These papers are forged! I'm going to sue you! I'm going to—" "You can certainly try, Marcus," I said, speaking for the first time that evening. My voice was calm and steady, without tremor or anger, carrying only the quiet confidence of someone who held complete control over the situation. I walked to the table and picked up that same rusty key, gently placing it on top of the stack of priceless documents. In her final letter, Grandmother Rose explained that she spent 3 years testing each of our characters. I looked directly at Marcus, with eyes as sharp as knives. "Marcus, you were satisfied with $5 million. I heard your cryptocurrency investment crashed last week. That Lamborghini is financed, isn't it?" Marcus recoiled, as though he had been struck by lightning. I turned toward my parents. "Dad, Mom, you decided that broken down house was appropriate for my station in life. You couldn't even be bothered to look at what might be hidden beneath that property. Because in your eyes, I was just like that house, worthless, not deserving of attention or respect. But Grandmother Rose saw who truly understood the meaning of family value." I surveyed the room, looking at all the relatives who had mocked and dismissed me. Their faces now displayed nothing but fear, desperate flattery, and complete confusion. Starting today, Mackenzie Construction Company will have a new direction and leadership. I held up the stock transfer documents. "David, since you are the company manager, I require you to submit a detailed financial reform report by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. If I am not satisfied with your proposals, I will exercise my rights as majority shareholder to restructure the entire management team." Father David's lips trembled as he tried to speak, but no words emerged. His image as an authoritative patriarch crumbled completely in that moment. "As for you, Marcus," I looked at my formerly arrogant brother, "your 15% shareholding remains valid. Based on current stock prices, it's probably worth several $1,000,000. If you manage it carefully, that should be sufficient to support you for the rest of your life. However, if you ever again attempt to use company funds to cover your personal investment losses, I will make sure you lose everything." "Kate!" Mother Carol tried to approach and take my hand, forcing her face into a smile that looked more grotesque than any expression of grief. "Sweetheart, we were just temporarily confused. After all, we are family, aren't we?" I gently pulled my hand away and took a step backward. "Family?" I smiled, though there was sadness in my expression. "When you mocked me at the funeral, when you abandoned me in that rat hole to fend for myself, did you think about us being family then?" "There's no need for pretense anymore, Mother. I won't seek revenge against any of you, and I won't treat you the way you treated me. I will provide you with dignity and dividend payments. But this key?" I held up the rusty key, and under the crystal chandelier lighting, it reflected a cold but determined gleam. "This key didn't just open a door. It opened access to a financial empire worth nearly $100 million. More importantly, it opened my understanding of my own true worth. The most important lesson Grandmother Rose taught me was this: real wealth is not about what you inherit, but about how you use that inheritance to prove that everyone who underestimated you was completely wrong." With those words, I turned and walked toward the exit. Peterson and his legal team followed close behind. Behind me, I could hear Marcus's hysterical shouting and my mother's sobbing, but to me, those sounds belonged to a different world entirely. 1 year later, 1247 Maple Street no longer stood as that broken-down little house. I did not demolish it to build high-rise developments, despite receiving enormous offers from commercial developers. Instead, I hired the finest craftsmen available to restore it to its original condition and converted it into a small community library and Mackenzie Family History Museum. The surrounding 3 blocks, under my careful planning, became an innovative district combining art galleries, affordable housing, and green parks. The area was renamed Rose Garden District in honor of my grandmother's memory. Mackenzie Construction Company, under my leadership, transformed into the state's largest green real estate development firm. Father David chose early retirement, and Mother Carol no longer participates in those shallow social circles where she had once sought validation. As for Marcus, he sold his sports car and reportedly is now working his way up from an entry-level position at a small startup company. Although this was forced upon him by circumstances, perhaps it represents his only opportunity for genuine personal growth. On that sunny afternoon, I stood at the entrance to the museum, looking at the rusty key now displayed in a bulletproof glass case. The bronze plaque beside it read, Rose Mackenzie, 1938 to 2023. From immigrant girl to hidden legend, she taught us, true inheritors are not those with the closest blood ties, but those with the finest character. At that moment, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. It was the mayor's car. He had scheduled a meeting with me to discuss new urban development projects. I straightened my jacket and walked toward the car with a smile. The insecure girl who had once hidden in library corners and been ignored by her family was gone forever. Standing here now was Kate Mackenzie Sullivan, owner of this land and master of her own destiny. In my pocket, I still carried that letter from Grandmother Rose, and it continued to warm my heart. I knew that no matter how far I traveled or how much I achieved, that rusty key would always remain in my heart, reminding me of the true meaning of worth and value. But my journey was far from over. Success, I was about to learn, brings its own unique challenges and unexpected revelations. 6 months after taking control of Mackenzie Construction Company, I received a phone call that would change everything once again. It was from a woman named Eleanor Blackwood, claiming to be a private investigator who had been hired by someone she could not name to look into my grandmother's past. Miss Sullivan, her voice was crisp and professional over the phone. I believe there are aspects of your grandmother's life that even you do not know about. Would you be willing to meet with me this afternoon? Something in her tone made me agree, despite my natural caution. We arranged to meet at a quiet coffee shop in the downtown business district, far from any place where I might encounter family members or business associates. Eleanor Blackwood turned out to be a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent decades uncovering secrets that others preferred to keep buried. Your grandmother was quite remarkable, she began without preamble, sliding a manila folder across the small table between us. But I suspect she never told you about her activities during the 1960s and 70s. I opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside were photographs, newspaper clippings, and official documents that painted a picture of Grandmother Rose I had never imagined. She had not simply been a successful investor and property developer. During the civil rights era, she had quietly used her growing wealth to fund legal defense funds for activists, provide scholarships for underprivileged students, and purchase properties in racially integrated neighborhoods when other developers refused to work in those areas. She was what we might call a silent philanthropist, Eleanor explained. She never sought recognition or publicity for her charitable work. In fact, she went to great lengths to ensure that her contributions could never be traced back to her personally. One photograph showed a much younger Rose Mackenzie standing beside a group of young African American students outside a newly integrated school. According to the caption, she had anonymously donated the funds to build the school's library and science laboratory. Another document revealed that she had purchased and renovated dozens of apartment buildings in low-income neighborhoods, maintaining them at below-market rents, while other landlords allowed similar properties to deteriorate into slums. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, though my heart was already swelling with pride for this woman I thought I had known completely. "Because," Eleanor said carefully, "there are people who believe your grandmother's estate should be used to continue her charitable work. People who question whether a 26-year-old with no experience in philanthropy is the right person to control such vast resources." The implication was clear. Someone was challenging my inheritance, not through legal channels, but through public pressure and media attention. "Who hired you?" I pressed, but Eleanor simply shook her head. "I cannot reveal my client's identity, but I can tell you that they have significant influence in this city, and they are prepared to make your grandmother's charitable history very public if you do not agree to certain conditions." I felt a familiar chill of fear, the same feeling I had experienced throughout my childhood when family members threatened to take away the few things that brought me comfort and security. "What conditions?" I asked quietly. Eleanor reached into her briefcase and produced another document. "Establish the Rose Mackenzie Foundation with an initial endowment of $50 million. Appoint a board of trustees that includes prominent community leaders. Limit your personal spending to no more than $5 million annually." In other words, they wanted me to give away more than half of my inheritance and submit to oversight from people I had never met. I stared at the proposed foundation charter for a long moment, thinking about everything Grandmother Rose had taught me. Then I looked up at Eleanor with a smile that apparently surprised her. "Tell your client that they have made a serious miscalculation," I said, standing up from the table. "They assume that I inherited money from my grandmother. What I actually inherited was her wisdom, her values, and her understanding of how to use power responsibly." Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with Peterson and a team of the city's most respected attorneys to research every aspect of my grandmother's charitable activities. What we discovered was even more extensive than Eleanor's folder had suggested. Rose Mackenzie had essentially been running her own private foundation for decades, but she had structured it in such a way that all donations appeared to come from various shell companies and anonymous trusts. The total amount she had given away over her lifetime exceeded $30 million. More importantly, we found detailed notes in her personal papers about her philosophy of charitable giving. She believed that true philanthropy should never be about public recognition or social status. It should be about identifying genuine needs and addressing them efficiently, without bureaucratic overhead or political considerations. Armed with this information, I called a press conference and invited every major media outlet in the city. The conference room at Mackenzie Construction Company was packed with reporters, photographers, and television crews. I had also invited several of the scholarship recipients and community leaders who had benefited from my grandmother's anonymous generosity over the years. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, standing behind a podium with photographs of my grandmother's charitable work displayed on screens behind me. "I want to tell you about the real Rose Mackenzie, a woman who spent 50 years quietly transforming this community without seeking any credit or recognition." I proceeded to outline the full scope of her philanthropic activities, complete with financial records and testimonials from people whose lives had been changed by her generosity. Some people have suggested that I am too young and inexperienced to manage the estate that my grandmother left behind. They have proposed that I should surrender control of these assets to a committee of their choosing. I paused, allowing the weight of this revelation to settle over the room. I want to be absolutely clear about my response to these suggestions. The Rose Mackenzie Foundation will indeed be established, but not because anyone pressured me into creating it. It will exist because that was always my grandmother's intention and because I choose to honor her legacy in the way she would have wanted. I announced that the foundation would receive an initial endowment of $60 million, $10 million more than had been demanded. The board of trustees would include educators, community activists, and nonprofit leaders, but the final decisions about grant-making would remain with me as the sole heir to Rose Mackenzie's estate. Furthermore, I continued, I want to address the assumption that my youth makes me unqualified for this responsibility. My grandmother did not choose me as her heir because of my age or my business experience. She chose me because she knew that I understood the difference between having wealth and being worthy of it. The press conference generated national media attention and effectively silenced my anonymous critics. Within days, I received calls from philanthropic organizations across the country, offering partnerships and collaborations. More satisfying than the public recognition, however, was the private conversation I had with Peterson a week later. "Your grandmother would be very proud," he told me as we sat in his office, reviewing the final legal documents for the foundation. "You handled that challenge exactly as she hoped you would." "Did you know who was behind the pressure campaign?" I asked. Peterson smiled mysteriously. "Let us simply say that certain members of your family were not content to accept their reduced circumstances quietly. They had hoped to use public opinion to force you into a more generous interpretation of family obligations." I was not surprised. Marcus and my parents had never been able to accept that I had proven myself more worthy of Grandmother Rose's trust than they were. "There is one more thing your grandmother wanted me to give you," Peterson said, reaching into his desk drawer. "She asked me to wait until you had faced your first real challenge as her successor." He handed me a small wooden box, elegant but simple in design. Inside, wrapped in faded silk, was a gold locket that had obviously been worn for many years. I opened the locket and found two tiny photographs. One showed a young woman who looked remarkably like me, standing beside a modest cottage that I recognized as the original version of 1247 Maple Street. The other photograph showed an elderly woman surrounded by children in what appeared to be a library or school. "The first picture is your grandmother on the day she bought the house," Peterson explained. "She was 25 years old and had just arrived from Ireland with nothing but determination and hope. The second picture was taken 50 years later at the library she funded in the Rose Garden district, surrounded by the grandchildren of families she had helped." I fastened the locket around my neck, feeling the warm weight of gold against my skin. "She wanted you to remember that true legacy is not measured in dollars or properties, but in the lives we touch and the positive changes we make in the world." As I left Peterson's office that day, I realized that my education was far from complete. Managing wealth responsibly would require constant learning, careful judgment, and the courage to make difficult decisions. But I was no longer the frightened, overlooked girl who had sat at the end of that conference table clutching a rusty key. I had become someone who could honor the trust that had been placed in me while staying true to my own values and vision for the future. That evening, I drove back to 1247 Maple Street, now beautifully restored and serving as the headquarters for the Rose Mackenzie Foundation. I sat in the garden that had been planted where weeds once grew, watching children play in the park that now occupied the former vacant lots. This was what Grandmother Rose had really left me, not just financial security, but the opportunity to continue her work of quietly making the world a little bit better, one person and one community at a time. The rusty key now hung alongside the gold locket, reminding me daily that sometimes the most precious inheritances come disguised as worthless gifts, and that the greatest wealth lies not in what we possess, but in what we choose to share with others. My story was no longer about escaping from a family that had never valued me. It had become something much more meaningful, a continuation of a legacy of quiet generosity that would outlive us all.